Welcome back to Naval Action and episode 86 of A Letter to the King. If you're new to the series, it's my attempt to keep us up to date with what's going on in the land of PvP and the likes on the global server. The server that never sleeps, or the server that I can never log into. And let's remind ourselves as where we were last week. Well, interestingly enough, the sort of the Brits are still just snaffling up empty ports. There was about 12 more empty ports got up this week, and half of those were by the Brits. Most of the day-to-day action really comes in one or two flavours. It's either the Swedes, the Danes, the French and the Cloggies knocking each other around, or it's pirate or British aggression predominantly, pirate or US aggression predominantly against the Americans. Which is why the old political alignment machine is very difficult to do at the moment. I've got the French here as neutral, but they're not really neutral. Different factions of the French are very much aligned with different factions of the Dutch or the Swedes. The Swedes and the Danes seem to predominantly be not happy with the Dutch, but it's not completely consistent. So basically what you've got right now is lots of little clans, or not so much little clans, I shouldn't say that, lots of clans who are sort of doing their own thing from an alignment perspective. So there is no real strong political alignment, other than the fact that the Brits and the pirates and the Americans and the pirates are clearly at war, and the Swedes are certainly having a crack to and fro with the Dutch. So this week we saw a couple of attacks on Nassau and Islamorada by the Americans, and in both scenarios the pirates rallied their men to the flag and handsomely defended the ports. Interesting sort of mix of ships. Quite often one side will come in with some heavy boys and the other side will come in predominantly wazzers, and vice versa. So although the sailing mechanics on the sort of top of the line ships have changed quite dramatically, people are still sort of sticking to their guns on that. Now I did try to get some information on this but failed miserably. So the Brits managed to return to Lanavas. This has changed hands about 3 times in this cycle, and the Brits did chuck the pirates out of Lanavas. I have to be honest, I don't even know if it was defended. Now, most of the port action, although quite often it's like 6 on 7 or 10 on 6, has been happening down on this stretch of land around here. Although the Dutch made probably the most headway, a lot of that was snaffling up empty ports. And it's probably this area here. The British have actually moved in down the bottom here. But it's this area here where most of the fracas is going on, and a fair amount of the open world PvP. But basically the net result was a bit of a port swap this week, with the Dutch probably making the best gains, but almost all of that, the net effect of that was pretty much the taking of some of the remaining free ports. We're now down to just over 40 free ports, so there's not much free land to be grabbed up. There's just the odd port lying around here and there, or when a clan fails to pay its coffers or decides to reduce its financial woes. And that's about it really for PvP. It's been a pretty quiet week. As I've said now for a couple of Letters to the King, the Australasian or the Oceanic contingent are pretty much out of the game on global. A few people have headed off back to the Euro server, but of course you're excluded from port battles unless you're up at 5 o'clock in the morning on that one. There's a fair amount of PvP open world to be had in the Antilles, as per normal around La Torte. The shallows of the Bahamas and up and down the US coast is always open for entertainment. So that's pretty much it for the open world PvP. As far as port swapping is concerned, the Bahamas will still probably be hot. The interesting thing with the pirates, they're kind of a special event club at the moment. They definitely come on for port defences. They're right up for that. But as far as organising some big pushes and the likes, it doesn't look like they're in for it. The likely area, like I say, is going to be around the Antilles. And really, this is where I'm getting my ship fun at the moment. It's in Naval Action Legends. And what we're beginning to see now is more players, as they rank up, are beginning to make it into frigates. There's definitely been a bit of a drop-off. I think people had a little look-see to see how things were going in the first week or so, where it was open to all us NA folks. But there's still plenty on there for a bit of a scrap. And what's happening now is that with the bigger ships, frigates and Essexes and the likes, people are really beginning to probably play a little bit more tactically. So it's not just the face-hugging carronades of doom that people are running around with, which was happening with the Serb and the Briggs and these sorts of critters. What we're really beginning to see now is a lot more tactics. Some of the guys are running around sailing Essex with the longs. The longs you get with the Essex have got a pretty good pen. They can pen most things in the water at 250 metres. So if you're predominantly up against players and you're in a frigate, longs are a good option because carros, they're easy to spot. You just get your binoculars out, and if you don't see things protruding, guns protruding from the gunnels, then clearly they're a carro monkey. And if they're a carro monkey, it's pretty straightforward, really. Stay away from them, because if they face hook you, they'll rip you to pieces. Whereas the longs, certainly the bottom deck at 250 metres, they'll eat a bubble and a bit each time. And of course, it does give you the option to bang in 2 or 3 salvos of chain. And you know that only takes like nearly 2 minutes to put 3 decent salvos of chain into someone. If they don't repair the sails, you can pick which end of their ship you decide to tickle, because you'll have such a big speed advantage on them. And if they do repair the sails, it's only 15 minutes. It's 15 minutes before they can repair them again, so it's pretty easy to whittle them back down. So just trying to face roll it with carros as we've moved up the ships. Certainly, if you're against the AI, then yeah, load up your carros and go a biffing, and you'll know from your play zone what is the most common mixer you're getting. But if you're up against players, and the players at the moment, someone was asking what it's like on the pickup groups in Naval Action Legends, and fundamentally the pickup groups are pretty good, because most of the people who we're playing with know what they're doing. Because they're all naval action veterans, as it were. Obviously, when the game opens to the general hoi polloi, there'll be a lot of noobs in there, and they won't really know what's going on. And as such, your pickup groups will be as either fantastic or tragic as you get in the World of Warplanes, World of Ships, World of Tanks, all these sorts of puggy jump-in arena-style games. Let's have a little look at what's going on the Talia Splinter Sail and Blood, and using lots of squishing and moving around. Ah, the icon's fallen off. You git, it must be behind the image. Oh well. So the Russian Empire on the board. Congrats. They got 1 last week, actually. I just marked it over here. But you'll see here most of the nation's pretty inactive, and everybody else has been snaffling up the cheap ports. There has been, like I say, a fair amount of port swapping between the Swedes, the French, the Danes and the Dutch, but at the end everybody came out roses. There was no big loss. Clan-wise, no change at all on the clans. The handsome Aussies, despite not being able to get on and do much biffing during their Australian TikTok, are still holding on to them, but the lion's share. Black, who really are predominantly playing a if you attack us, we'll give you a scrap type of game, of not lost a port, although I think next week with Lanavas falling, they'll be down 1. GA, CCP and Swin I don't think moved at all this week. And that's it for a much abridged letter to the king. They'll be like this for a couple of weeks until stuff brings me back to the open world, and that sort of stuff will require basically the shutdown to change. And until then, I'm just going to enjoy myself predominantly in Legends and do a bit of trading and shipbuilding, and keeping my eye out for port battles in the open world, but I'm enjoying the Legends. I'm enjoying the different ships. Some of them seem to behave very differently than I recall from when I've sailed them in open world. I always seem to remember the Essex was a bit of a darter and it was nice for the turn. In Legends, it's kind of the opposite. It's a bit of a brick, but it's a very steady gunship. So I'm going to carry on enjoying myself in Legends, and until then, give us a like, give us a subscribe. I'll see you on the ocean, and I'll catch you